Up next, we present to you the face of National Institution for Transforming India Better, known as NITI Aayog. Mr. Amitabh Kant is presently posted as CEO and is the author of Branding India, an Incredible Story. He has been a key driver of Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, and God's Own Country campaigns, which positioned and branded India as well as Kerala as leading tourism destinations. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Amitabh Kant.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, wonderful to be back at HICSA and wonderful to see so many people who've assembled here today. These have been truly extraordinary times, very, very abnormal times, and good to see normalcy getting restored and at least seeing people sit together. So this kind of gives a tremendous amount of confidence. I think vaccines have been at the forefront of restoring normalcy, and I think it's important to say that speaks immensely about human ingenuity and human innovativeness, that in such a short while the world has been able to bring out so many vaccines of different technologies and has been able to vaccinate so many people. And India truly has been at the forefront of this effort to bring back normalcy, because I'm stressing this point because without this, tourism can never rebound. And without vaccination, tourism can never grow. And India has truly been at its forefront because we've vaccinated close to about 800 million people. 800 million people who've had a single jab. We vaccinated close to about 210 million people who've had double shots. And India has demonstrated both the speed and the tremendous amount of massive effort at vaccination. And at our peak, we did about 25 million a day of vaccination, which is equivalent to the population of entire Australia. That is the kind of speed of vaccination which Europe would have done in about 11 days. That is, if a country was of a population of about 50 million, it would take about 9 days to vaccinate what India does in 1 day. And therefore, we've done it with vaccines which have been made in India, and we've done it with a platform called CoWIN, which has been extremely, totally digital. It's verifiable, it's linked to Aadhaar, it's linked to your passport. And what it has demonstrated is that it's possible to both do innovation as well as use technology to leapfrog even in a moment of crisis for India. And I've actually been a witness to travel and tourism going through several crises, and actually it's one sector which is hit by a crisis. It's the first sector which gets hit by a crisis. Actually, when I came in from Kerala and I joined Ministry of Tourism, right after that, there was an attack on our parliament, there was war in Afghanistan, a whole range of incidents, and travel and tourism was just performing at about 10 to 12% occupancy in our hotels, and there were very few hotels at that point of time. And at the peak of that crisis, we'd actually driven the Incredible India campaign. So my belief is that actually every crisis is an opportunity, and I have no doubt in my mind that tourism will bounce back, and it'll bounce back with a vengeance. And you will see tourism flag flying in a very big way. But tourism is very intricately linked to the economy. And if the Indian economy does well, tourism will do well. If the Indian economy doesn't grow at rapid rates of 9 to 10% per annum year after year for next 3 decades or more, it'll be very difficult for India to emerge as a leading tourism destination. And therefore, my belief is that actually it's the Indian economy which needs to grow rapidly. And it needs to grow at high rates on a sustained basis over a long period of time. I've been a long-term believer in that. And if you look at Indian economy right now, and it's important to look at high-frequency data which is coming out. And if you look at the manufacturing data, the PMI is about the manufacturing PMI is close to about 53. And the PMI for services at about 57. What it really demonstrates is that India is getting back into a high trajectory growth. There is expansion across the entire economy. The recovery is firmer, and that it will sustain. And the other high-frequency data that you look at, one is exports. And India's exports have done extremely well. Actually, the month of August has demonstrated that India has actually achieved one of its highest export figures at about close to $53 billion. The merchandise exports are growing really at rapid and very fast pace. If you look at other high-frequency data, which is the goods and services tax receipts, which is the government revenue receipts, and that at about 1.12 lakh crores was about 30% higher than last year and about 19% higher than the previous year. And the inflation is well under control. It was a source of worry, but right now it's at a 4-month low, so that's fairly well under control. And I'm giving some of these indices to show how the economy is actually behaving right now. And if you look at the foreign direct investment, it actually is one of the biggest factors which is reflecting on the confidence in Indian economy. It's grown in 2021 at about, we had a record foreign direct investment in 2021 at about 81 billion, out of which 60 billion was just in equity across the Indian sector. So throughout this last year, this was the peak of the pandemic, the foreign direct investments have actually grown at record high. And in April to June this year, the FDI has remained extremely robust. It's continued to grow and expand further. I've looked at some other indices, and one of which is what's happening to, I'm not a great believer in the stock markets, but the stock markets are at an all-time high. But I think I looked beyond that. I looked at what's happening to the IPOs and what's happening to the startups. India's done about 26 unicorns this year, which is twice the number, just about a little more than twice the number of what China has done. It's more than 1/3 more than what the United States has done. And what we've been able to build is a culture of unique platforms across which all these startups have grown and prospered. So whether it's Aadhaar, whether it's Unified Payment Interface for digital payments, whether it's the government procurement of the government e-marketplace. Now government procures everything digitally. It doesn't buy anything through other things other than the government e-marketplace, or the launching of the digital health mission yesterday, or the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which actually insures 500 million people in India, which is the biggest health insurance scheme across the world, but it's totally digital. And it's paperless, it's cashless. You can be living in Tamil Nadu and moving to Bihar, you will carry your health insurance with you. So what has happened is that many of these startups are growing on the back of a country which is digitally rich. It's becoming increasingly digitally intelligent. They're using a lot of this rich data to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to drive growth. So therefore, my belief is that if you look at all these analyses of different analysts, the World Bank, IMF, this year's India's growth is likely to be consistent around, India is likely to grow in the rates of about 9 to 11% this year. But it's important to say that while India is going to grow at 9 to 11% this year, it's important to accelerate growth next year. Next year is critical because India needs to take the growth to 11 to 12% next year and year after that to be able to accelerate further. And this, to my mind, would require India has pushed a lot of structural reforms in its economy during this period of crisis. And every crisis is an opportunity for structural reforms. We had earlier the goods and services tax reforms, we had the insolvency and bankruptcy code, we had the RERA. These are all very difficult reforms, very complex reforms in the life of a democracy. And then we had the direct tax reforms where we brought down the corporate tax rates to about 15%, which is on par with Ireland, which is the lowest tax rate country in the world. And we've made assessment all faceless. We've made it completely, the assessment is entirely faceless right now. So a whole range of reforms which were carried out previously, but I'm not getting into the past. I'm looking at just the last month. What has happened to the economy in the last month? And if you look at the political will in terms of pushing reforms in one stroke in last month, the government did away with retrospective tax, which was hanging fire for an inordinately long time to send the message that the government believes in predictability and consistency of policies, and it believes in sending the message of that it is a country which believes in a regime of consistency of policies. So it's abolished the retrospective tax. It came out with a 6 lakh crore, which is close to about 85 billion US dollar worth of a scheme for asset monetization. The government said that we are good at constructing assets, we are extremely poor at operating and maintaining assets. We want to bring in private sector. So across roads, across pipelines, across gas sector, across petroleum sector, across power grids, every sector of the economy, or warehouses, a huge number of warehouses or sports stadium, all of them are being put out to transparent competitive bidding to attract private sector investment in these areas. So 85 billion asset monetization pipeline, an infrastructure pipeline of close to about US dollar 1.5 trillion, because eventually the growth of an economy is driven by infrastructure. The world had gone through a very similar phase to what it has gone through during the COVID period, which was in the 1920s, the period of Great Depression. United States came out in a very big way in the post-20s, and that was simply because of Roosevelt's great deal of just pushing for infrastructure. And therefore, the government's focus is on creating world-class infrastructure through the private sector, and the infrastructure pipeline, which is about $1.5 trillion, is really aimed at creating world-class infrastructure. And lastly, the government demonstrated its will to carry out tough reforms, including ensuring that there is competitive play in the telecom sector by coming out with very major reforms in the telecom sector, because without that, Vodafone as a company would not have survived, and the government wanted 3 players to survive in the telecom sector. Now, the government normally does not do such things, but in this particular case, it demonstrated its political will to do this. It also came out with a policy measure for a bad bank, putting in about close to 31,000 crores in the equity into the bad bank, and saying that NPAs, non-performing assets from banks, will move on to this bad bank so that banks will be able to lend. Many banks have lost the art of lending, and therefore the government said that NPAs will move to the bad bank and the banks will then be able to lend much more vigorously. In addition to this, the government has come out with a production-linked incentive scheme for close to 13 sectors. The objective is that the world is going through a huge disruption. India must be an integral part of the global supply chain. And if the world is going through this disruption, many of these investors should move across from other countries into India to become a very major part of the global supply chain in India. And therefore, across telecom, across mobile manufacturing, across battery manufacturing, all these emerging areas of growth, a vast range of emerging areas of growth for electric battery manufacturing, etc., we've come out with a production-linked incentive scheme. So these are new areas of growth simply because India quite often gets into the sunset areas of industry, and once you get into the sunset areas of industries, it's very, very difficult to penetrate global market. But if you get into the emerging areas of growth, then you can ride the wave of big growth, and that is what we've attempted to do through the production-linked incentive scheme. The other key, I think, the political will to demonstrate growth and push for big-ticket reforms was really through the disinvestment policy, where the government said it will get out of all areas of public sector except 4 strategic areas. It identified 4 areas and said the remaining areas will move out. And probably the will to do this will be demonstrated when Air India will, in a very short while, it's at a very advanced stage, will get privatized. And therefore, actually the government is demonstrating that it's willing to take tough measures, it's willing to take strong structural reforms and push for growth. Every crisis is an opportunity to my mind. And I have, as I said right in the beginning, I have seen after 9/11, the tourism industry bounced back in a very big way. It bounced back because we, at that particular point of time, a whole range of innovative measures were carried out. I've seen the tourism industry bounce back after the attack in Bombay. Again, we'd seen the suffering of the tourism industry, it bounced back. But every time there's a crisis, it's an opportunity. But it's also important to understand that the basic nature of the industry will undergo a change. There'll be radical difference from how the travel and tourism industry was working earlier and how it will operate in the future. My belief is that not merely the tourism industry, but the world in the future scenario, only those companies will survive which will go digital and which will go green. There will be no other companies, only those companies' valuations, only those companies which are digital and green will be able to attract capital. Only those companies which are digital and totally green will be able to grow and prosper in the coming years, because from 26 onwards, Europe will put a very major border tax on companies which are not green. And therefore, one of the key things in government we are doing is to really move from fossil fuel to cleaner forms of fuel. And one of the things which the Prime Minister has announced is this whole big ambitious scheme to have green hydrogen in this country and make India totally independent of fossil fuel by 2047 when India becomes independent. And green hydrogen is created by using solar energy to crack water. And if we are able to do this on large scale, very large scale, this is really the future of new energy. And therefore, my belief is that it's very important that each one of us really realize that if you're not digital, if you're not going green, it'll be very difficult to survive in the future of the world for tomorrow, or attract capital, or enhance your value. The third thing, as far as the travel and tourism industry is concerned, I'm absolutely sure that we are moving towards a sharing economy. I mean, you've seen a company like Airbnb, its valuation is close to about $100 billion US. $100 billion US of one Airbnb. It's more than any other of these large hotel companies, simply because it's a sharing company. So the world is moving towards sharing economy. The world is moving towards experiences. And all the hoteliers will have to look beyond the gates of their hotels to create unique experiences for the travelers of the world. And last point I want to make is that it's important to understand that technology will be the key driver. Technology will be the key driver of growth. It'll be one area which will enable companies to leapfrog. It will enable countries to leapfrog. India has demonstrated its huge ability to leapfrog through this biometric. We're the only country in the world which has biometric, which has everyone has mobile. We've given bank accounts to everyone. We created the unified payment interface, which is really about putting all the banks together and enabling digital transaction. I have not used my checkbook. I have not used my credit card for almost close to about 2 years. I only use my mobile phone for payments. Same thing we've done to government procurements. We're going to do the same thing for health. So what the government has done is to create large platforms. India is the only country in the world which has created platforms. UPI's value in 4 years' time is more than the value of Amex. In the next 2 years, its value will be more than the value of Visa. Imagine if UPI was a private company, what would happen? And therefore, India gives you the size and scale of its domestic market. The size of its scale of its domestic market, which will enable you to penetrate global markets. And therefore, my belief is domestic tourism will really be the key. The domestic market will be really the key to really spur growth in the tourism sector. We will open up in a calibrated manner the tourism sector. We are determined to open it up in a calibrated manner, but domestic tourism will really be the key driver as the world normalizes. And as the world normalizes, I'm absolutely sure the world will look for unique experiences across the world, and there will be no better company, no better country in the world, and no better tourism sector than the Indian hospitality sector to provide the unique experiences which India does. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.